It should be at the bottom of the screen. Did you put it? There you go.
Let's do this. Okay. I think we are live on all the platforms we want to be. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Sean Murphy, the executive director of 1455. If this is your first time checking out one of our programs, which are always free, welcome. Not 1455. If this is your first time, we are a nonprofit that celebrates storytelling and tries to connect community by any means necessary. Check us out, get involved at 1455litarts.org. We're always happy to work with our partners at DC's Historic Potter's House. I encourage you to go to their site and buy your copies of tonight's books in plural. Support independent booksellers. Check out their event page. Check out our event page for future events, more information. And of course, we're always recording tonight's event for posterity, and we'll share that on all the socials. But we are here tonight, kicking off our programming for the year. And it's an absolute honor to be joined by poet extraordinaire Cynthia Manick. Let me introduce her formally, and then we'll introduce her through her words. But Cynthia is the author of No Sweet Without Brine, which, among other accolades, received 5 stars from the one and only Roxane Gay. Enough said. She's the editor of The Future of Black Afrofuturism, Black Comics, and Superhero Poetry. I mean, right? We could stop now. That's a mic drop. Also, author of Blue Hallelujahs. She's a storyteller at literary festivals, libraries, universities, and most recently, the Brooklyn, Frye, and Rubin museums. Her work has been featured in the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day series, which, by the way, if you're a poetry fan and you're not subscribed to that, do that immediately. You can start every day with a poem. She's been featured in the Brooklyn Rail, Rumpus, and many other outlets. She lives in Brooklyn, New York, but travels widely for poetry. About No Sweet Without Brine, I'm going to read from the back cover. Her sophomore poetry collection is an elegiac ode to Black womanhood in 4 parts, both soulful and celebratory, with piercing language. Manic captures the universality of life for a narrator who dares to exist between youthful remembrances and adult experiences. Each poem suggests a hint of sorrow, which makes the celebration and recognition of Blackness in all ways that much sweeter. This book makes you agree with the mantra, I want us living, not just alive. Cynthia, we planned this a while back. I have been looking forward. Welcome, and thank you for being here, and thank you for writing this extraordinary collection.
Thank you so much, Sean. I'm excited to be here with you. I'm going to start by reading 3 poems. The first is a self-portrait poem one of my favorites. It's called Self-Portrait Number 5, Phoenix and Lullabies. Some people think I was born savage, biting at hands, clouds and daggers, with no softness to be found, but I contain whispers. Bright coral beads stacked, the language of blood jostling against itself. Coconut oil. Curves molded by my mother's thumb, broad bones, and something wild. Sometimes I'm a brown-belly songbird who knows a tongue could be in land not beaten. The hot archache in someone's back while the TV's on. Or it can be a pistol. It covers all my gristle barbs, blue and yellow howls, and the ragdoll heart. Where I shook off my father's baritone the day he left, I turned brine lake. I never stirs the same way twice. Salt, assos, and smiles boiled over. It's not a lie to say that I'm still learning to love the frames of undressed trees. My glasses, the Medusa head that defies every comb, red pomegranates. My baby self, the little girl inside who still craves model trains, Josie and the Pussycats cartoon, and wonders about the spaces between the teeth and the ribs. So I'm going to do 2 more. This next poem, I actually wrote it during the pandemic. People were writing poems and writing books. I wasn't doing any of that. I was busy. I was working. I was Zooming. I was, Yeah. So finally, I think year two, I was like, okay, I have to start. I have to get back into the flow. So this poem is called Litany from My Fears and Questions after Audre Lorde. For those of us getting used to writing poems for the dead, for rainbows without a streak of black, for Gabura daisies that wilt quickly, for silence so quiet you tilt like Earth's axis, like that day in September when the phones rang and rang and rang, and you learned that charred wood is stronger than most barks. Does love taste like sweetgrass? Can I be mad as love as sweetgrass? This jump in the blood mean I'm having a heart attack, a heartbreak, or a heart's fury between dawns? Can a mouth be starved for the sun? How many fibroids is too many? Can I take 3 leaves instead of 2? For those of us expected to beautify what's hemmed in, latest numbers in our zip codes, questions on God, particles, boredom, commas of the time prior, I mean our mothers glued to the phone to lay names of the sick. They fall like M dashes or brittle teeth. When will scientists name this new emotion? Is it wrong to want a storm named after you? Can a 3 a.m. phone call be good news? News so jubilant that our lungs expound 6 liters of air? Let this be the last time we mourn, or dream of beasts, or a beach full of 100 brown turtles retracted in their shells. And lastly, I think I'm going to read this poem I wrote. I realized I was writing a book. I was actually at MacDowell Colony, and I was in Chapman Studio, deep in the woods. It was deep, deep in the woods, and of course, there's a lot of strife going on racially. And for the first time in a while, I didn't dream of death. I didn't dream of anything bad. It was like a nice dream. I was like, hey, I can have nice dreams again. This poem is called 3 a.m. and the moon is curled like a sea. And I didn't dream of coffins today, or the scattering of names or trees I can never recall. Instead, there was a silver dog chasing joy in the shape of a hat, along with a cousin eating Jack and Jill cookies, and my hands held fistfuls of not yet ripe tomatoes that needed a dark place or bag to become true. Do I need to go to shopping or check on a relative? The dream book says tomatoes symbolize harmony, but my mind wonders how long it takes for a star to burn out. If its last beats are like the barefoot heart in love for the first time. I once read that Black poets write love poems the least, as if we're too busy swallowing morsels of dusk, tallying wounds, knowing how often atoms fissure and our bodies part, but can we not do both? Banish the lines, grow braless and numb, fumble in the dark with a sweat so sweet, he or she is well fed. Fill pages with bathwater and breaths ungraceful. Movement, like a train of yellow flowers, because it's what we saw on our very first date. In another dream, I see a fleet of newly painted dove white subway trains, ugly, beautiful, as if a ghost threw pure light. People both alive and past are full of bright colors I can't name. They move so smooth, my ear barely recognizes the revolving jubilee, the sky inside all of their hands. Thanks, Sean.
Uh, well, we might not. We if I have my druthers, we might not be done hearing you poetry. But uh, thank you, and I just want to. I say I've said this many times, and I've felt it many times. Once again, there is just nothing quite like the treat of hearing a poet read
Mhm.
words you've already read in their voice. So thank you for gracing us with that opportunity. I want to set the tone by just saying that there's always the dog ear test, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. I didn't read this collection. I luxuriated in it. I spent time with it, and
Mhm.
I felt things, I learned things. I want to kick it off with a little bit that I jotted down, also so I can just tell you to your face how I feel about these poems, and feel good doing it. I wrote down, these poems travel through spaces and times, your own and our Earth's. And one big compliment I have is that the voice throughout accounts for these multitudes, but a tone and perspective is definitely established. Put a less delicate way, while anyone could and should read this poetry, there's never any question these words are being written by a Black woman. Put still another way, Cynthia is a tour guide through a world filled with ancestors, spirits, recipes,
Mhm.
joys, sorrows, and a refusal to keep things quiet. This makes the collection at once urgent and original and easy to savor. I hope I'm
Oh,
capturing a little
thank
bit
you.
of what I felt. Um,
I love the idea of tour guide. I always think of poets as undercover anthropologists because we tell the stories behind the stories. And
yes.
that tour guide metaphor works just as well. That you're
Well,
going through life and you're trying to look for what happens after the event or before the event or next door to the event.
yes. Yes, and
Yeah.
I think archaeologists and anthropologists are both, for this type of
Mm-hmm.
poetry in particular, um, we're talking about real things that happen to real people in the real world,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want to
Yeah.
elevate you by diminishing others. I'll just say the poetry that really speaks to me and I think stands the test of initial criticism and time are poems that are seeking to engage with themes
Mm-hmm.
that people who are of this world can relate to. And I think that involves looking out from oneself and trying to bring this vast space in. And it's a point of departure for conversation and community, and connection.
I totally agree. I'm always thinking about the poet Nikki Finney, who's one of my mentors, and a couple years ago she was talking about how poetry, if you're gonna write poetry, you should think about, well, how does poetry happen in your day? How does it happen in your house? How does it happen in your street, then your city, then your state, then the country, and then the universe? So you have to think about not every poem is gonna have that many jumps. It's impossible.
Right.
But when you're writing, think about, well, how can you reach all those echoes if you can?
Well, and we talked right before we came on about our mutual love of jazz, and
Yes.
in the wrong hands, I would say it's a too easy cliche to invoke. Like, it bops along, but we were talking a little bit about, whether it's language or music, there's always an inner dialogue and connecting dots, and those go through time and space and people
Mm-hmm.
and places. And again, in the right hands, this is such a powerful tool of reminding us that words on a page can and should jump out and evoke sense and colors and feelings and memories. I got that consistently throughout this book. And there just were so many either laugh out loud or moments where I just had to stop and sit with it for a second.
Just thinking about jazz, even though people can say it's frenetic, it goes from A to Z, F to G, there's always a bass line in the back. This guy on the bass was playing the whole time as everything else was moving in all these different rhythms. So you're going to have this bass line. The bass line could be a voice, it could be a poem, it could be the string, it could be a memory, but you can always have that thing in the back that's going to center you throughout any poem, throughout any jazz session, right? And it's always things,
Yeah.
and then when you're doing jazz, I'm not a musician, but it's purposeful. Yeah, you're riffing, but you're riffing to a beat, you're following a movement, you're following something.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting, right, is when we talk about improvisation in music, especially jazz, there's that
Mm-hmm.
element of working without a net. I find poetry like this truly heroic because you really are operating without a net, and it's just the poet and the page. You don't have a band backing you up. You don't have an audience necessarily right, to respond and
Yeah,
applaud.
yeah.
An audience is not built in to applaud at the right moments. Those moments have to be earned, in
Mm-hmm.
quiet. And again, that's poetry can crash and burn and often does. when
So,
someone's
so
fresh
true.
outside.
Yeah, you can have a poem that you love and it goes nowhere. It's like, ugh, this poem, I love it. And they're like, you know. But then
Yeah.
after this book, I was like, well, my first book was very Buhali, which I love. It's very craft focused. It's about the past. This book, I wanted it to be, I call them wide hip poems. Hip poems that sort of spread out and come back in. You know, you go on a train station on a train and the guys have the oil spread out, took all the space. It's like, you know, each poem will take up space. And so for this book, I was like, I want to take up a lot of space and really just think about, well, intentionally, how does my mind work? And how can I make my mind reflect that in my poetry?
Well, I would say these poems absolutely stretch out and take liberties, but they're never self-indulgent. They're never,
Mm-hmm.
there's no, you know what? I'm catching myself in real time with an edit. I was going to say there's no fat on them, but that's not right. The fat's in the right places.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? This is not a
Yes,
fillet.
yes.
This is a marbled cut,
So you
but
think about No Sweet Without Brine, the meat has fat, but you cut it in the right places. That's
yeah,
editing. That's editing at the end. You
that's right.
edit, you stripe down and yeah.
And the fat is where you get the flavor. Yeah, we
Mm-hmm.
could go
Because you want
crazy
a
with
full
food
meal, right? You
metaphors.
don't want to lead an appetizer. You want a full meal every time you read a poem.
I refer
You know what I mean?
I refer to poetry like yours as a steak knife. Steak knife.
Yes.
I got to put on a hard hat and go in there and do some work. But I was gonna say, and I jotted this down too. I think that even though I've been reading and writing poetry for a long time, it's so wonderful and humbling and refreshing
Mhm.
to appreciate and be reminded that poems read correctly, one needs to slow down, savor,
Mm.
comprehend, let the images create feelings. But I feel like in 2024, even aficionados of the form forget that the best poems have the power to oblige you to slow down.
Yeah. Yes, I totally agree. Even Lisa Clifton, I mean, her poems were tight fists, but even though they were small, you forced yourself to read every line because there was no fat on Lucille's poems, or her poems were to the cut to the bone. And so I got that. I think I admire her so much for that ability to sort of have lines where every line means something. You know what I mean? So you don't have these throwaway lines. Every line has to go somewhere.
And you know what I think that is, Cynthia, and I think you just nailed very succinctly one of the ways I'd compliment this work is that it's both it's a respect for the form and it's a respect for the reader to not have throwaway lines. That sounds so reductive and simple, but right in
Hmm.
practice we don't see that all the time, even in
Yeah.
poetry, which poetry is rightly celebrated as being, a more compressed, condensed form of expression. But um, I think certain poets take liberties, and you get that one good line or that closer. Poetry that speaks to a reader on a really deep level is there's no
Hmm.
throwaway lines. It makes you pay attention, makes you notice things.
I agree. I think my students, sometimes I think I'll teach and I'll be like, well, don't send me no 3-page poem. I was like, don't send me no 2-page poem, okay? You don't have anything to say in 3 pages. You need to it's like you need to break it down to 2 pages or less. Because most of that is a journal entry. That's not a poem.
That's right. That's right. Um, well, so let's back up a little bit and
Hmm.
talk to me about the origins of this collection. When did you realize, how intentional was the different sections, or did this evolve as you were writing and you realized, I want to give us a little insight into how this all came together?
Well, I believe I originally started it. I think I want to say at MacDowell in 2017. I realized, okay, I have something here. So I realized that I wanted to address both how life could be a clusterfuck, excuse my language, but it can also be beautiful. And it can also have wonder. And it can also have culture that's celebrated and culture that mourns. So my mom's from the South. And so she's always cooking Southern food. And I took out the idea of how she brines the meat, how they brine the meat with vinegar to get the salt out, and how the sweetness eventually comes from the cooking. So I was like, you know what? I think I want that to sort of how do we go through the brine to get to the sweet? That's how I envisioned the book. So after that, I just started writing. I didn't write with a certain purpose. I just wrote as poems came to me, as I'm in workshop, as I'm with friends. I'm writing and I'm writing. And then eventually I started thinking about, well, if it was going to be a book, how would I sort it? Because I like the idea of elements, for 4. It's one of my favorite things. So I was like north, south, west, thinking about how would I section this book? Well, I've thought about, well, music. Music is something I really, really love. I listen to music all the time. And so when I'm doing readings, actually, I think about, well, if my poem was a playlist, how do I want my reading to end? So do I want it to be a journey of discovery? Do I want it to be like an Isley Brothers song, shout, shout? Or do I want it to be a fast car, Tracy Chapman? Like, how do I want my experience with the book to flow? So that's how it originally became organized. Okay, I wanted to have a section where you meet the poetic me. And I wanted to have a section where you meet things that my culture loves. I want to have a section where you meet how a culture can love one another. I wanted to have a section where we thought about, how do we get through things? How do we get through everyday things? And then also thinking about all that, how do you celebrate who you are? Yes, the world could be horrible, right?
Yep.
That stuff is going on all the time, but you still have to love someone next to you. You still have to go to work in the morning. You still have to hopefully live your epic life. So how do we go about doing that? And so that book became that. So what does it mean to be Black and alive right now? What does it mean to be Black and live right now?
Yeah. Well, and that, I mean, that comes through powerfully, clearly. But again,
Mm-hmm.
I want to acknowledge that, and it's such a, I mean, I could invoke Whitman, but the poems, I was thinking while I was reading, and I don't think this very often, which is again a high compliment that I can pay you. Novels are often celebrated for world building. That you're brought
Mm,
into, the author is slowly, steadily, intentionally creating something, even if it's based in reality, but there's world building. I don't know if I've ever thought about world building through poetry, but this collection is building
mm,
worlds. And the way you just described the project, I was thinking, like, again, why it resonates with me so powerfully is what I would tell any, aspiring student or wannabe poet is, you do want to draw on the autobiographical, but if you've lived a life that's worth celebrating and talking about, you're invariably talking about other people and things. Like, you're talking about
mm-hmm,
yourself, but you're showing yourself through the music you like, the food you eat, the influence of your family, the people that drive you crazy, the people that you miss, the people that you adore. That all
mm-hmm.
has to come through. And again, I don't know if a lot of people can successfully do that, either because they are trying to write poetry with a capital P,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
what I would
They're
call
worried about, they
anthology.
still focus on the craft. They forget about the heart. And the heart is basically you. You bring the heart to it. What makes you you?
Yep. And I think the other side of that, right, is if one has not lived a particularly interesting or adventurous life, the writing will reflect that. We need not
Mm-hmm,
worry here that the poet has not lived a rich life, with full of joy, always comes through, but a share of sorrow and
mm-hmm.
legitimate righteous anger at the world the way it is and the way it should be. Um, if I may, I'm gonna make a request. I have a few of these.
Have
Uh,
a few.
a
Okay, which
handful
ones?
of, well, so there's a poem, MTA transit exam, attempt number 4. The note I wrote
Mm,
down was, this poem stopped me cold, made me sad, then angry, then humbled, and then ultimately grateful that the daughter, a poet, is paying it forward, her words bearing witness. I would love you to share that with us if you would be so kind.
of course. MTA transit exam attempt number 4. One night I hear my father's voice shaking out. If you want appeal our evaluation of your employment history, like his tongue are magpies needing to be trained. My step in the kitchen, he becomes a silent movie, but there are no Black fathers in silent movies. Later, I discover he takes the exam a fifth, sixth, and eighth time. Under supervision, pre-prepared track and road, until muzzle he stopped, thrashing on the hook, trying to swim upstream to pay with a little something left over. And I learned to hide my shimmer, forget spelling bees, star sticker reading charts, and test score smiles, thinking them master tools to be used only in secret.
I mean, just kudos.
I
There,
think we forget that our parents are just people. It's one of the moments where I realized that my father was a person. We all have those moments in our lives where we realize that our parents are just bigger than you, have bills to pay, and they have their own stuff going on.
yeah,
And so to see him doing this test, it was like, okay, he has his own worries. He has his own thing he has to fight. Whether it's get education, I don't know what it is, but it's a lot of things he has to fight. So I have to just observe it and then protect it any way I can.
protect it. I like that. I like the idea. I like the notion, the sacred responsibility of those with words or access to words.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking for those that can't, won't, don't want to. The expression is also a name of a great jazz album. Quiet as it's kept.
Mm.
Things will be memories, families, histories, people, lives will be quiet as they're kept. And poets, I think, are constantly kind of carrying that torch and saying, "Not on my watch."
Yeah, yeah. Most definitely. I totally agree. I think we have to be our own storytellers. We also have to be our own archivists, right? We
Yes.
have to sort of archive those pieces of our histories. And it could be moments, it could be memories, or it could just be the ideas that originated with us, but we got to keep them somewhere so they're not lost.
Yeah, and I think, this is especially relevant always with marginalized groups or groups that are underrepresented or have traditionally been underrepresented in our culture. And that,
Mm-hmm.
of course, could be anything from, a Black father from a different century to grandmothers and recipes. And that's how, to me, right, poetry and language can teach and enrich. This is all about showing, not telling, and how this world building is making everything richer, because you're not the same person after you read these types of poems. You're seeing the world through different
Mm-hmm.
eyes. You're not able to see your own privilege and experience quite the same way. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a very powerful tool and weapon to use. And you use it, you lean in with love, but you check us when we need to be checked, and you check yourself when you need to be checked.
I try. I try, Sean. I try. And I also think it's respect. These poems aren't 100% autobiographical. I'm a poet. So this imagination, it's an amalgamation of fathers, an amalgamation of mothers and sisters and all these things. But there are elements that do mean a lot to me. So I'm trying to make sure that I treat them with care.
Exactly. I mean, respecting the craft, respecting the people, and
Hmm.
I think that there really is something very spiritual about the intention of wanting to do right. I know when I write about jazz musicians, or just dead heroes,
Mm.
beyond the desire to celebrate, there's this genuine sense of obligation. Like, how dare you pick up a pen to write about Thelonious Monk if you're not going to bring something meaningful? Otherwise, just listen to the music and don't muddy the waters.
Yeah,
Someone like
yes.
Monk or any number of people we could mention, Alice
Mhm.
Coltrane. Those compositions acquit for themselves quite nicely. These lives of family and friends are acquit. If a poet has to almost challenge, I think, themselves to elevate it somehow and say, this is worth celebrating, and I'm gonna prove to you why.
Hmm. Yeah, I was thinking about like Gwendolyn Brooks. I think she was one of the first poets to really make Black life and poems normalized. She made poems in her kitchen and her family was in her kitchen with her with these poems in them. And so I think I sort of followed her in terms of, well, I'm gonna go to work today. I may put that work in my poem. Who knows? And maybe look at my cubicle today. I'm gonna put a cubicle in my poem. So making like regular everyday life a part of your poetic process. I mean, I think before it was frowned upon, but I think since we all live, most poets live multi lives. I mean, you know, we have our day job, our poet job, our writing job, our editor job, our marketing ourselves job, being a sister job, being a daughter job. So I think, you know, before we try to separate them all, but now let the worlds collide carefully, carefully, and you know, don't leave anything out if you don't have to.
For sure. And again, I think that to me, that really speaks to a poet that is part of the world going on day in and day out, which means kind of a cognizance of blue collar workers, people that have been up since 5 a.m., you know, to hit the coal
Mm-hmm.
mines or drive the subway, being aware of all the backs we stand on, even as we feel sorry for ourselves, aware of the people trying to educate and enlighten our kids, being aware of the pain and suffering and aware of the inequity. All of that is the broth, right? That we can cook these
Mm-hmm.
poems in. And I think it does a disservice again to the form and the readers to not bring that stuff in, especially because, and I'll speak only for myself here, Cynthia, but
Yeah.
as I get older, I don't have time for poems that even 25 years ago I would have read and had a reverence
Oh
for.
yeah.
I don't, if you're not speaking to kind of contemporary, you know, the special anxieties and urgencies of
Mm-hmm.
contemporary life, I feel like it's a missed opportunity. It's a missed opportunity for engagement.
Yeah. As this opportunity for engagement and for connection. Because when the Cynthia, 20-year-old Cynthia will love X amount of poems. But now I'm just like, okay, you're talking about what? I don't got time for that. I ain't got time for that. You know what I mean? 'Cause you're right. 'Cause as we get older, as our tastes evolve, as we evolve, what we want to see evolves. What we want to engage with evolves.
Yeah,
And I think that's totally, totally normal.
it totally is. And, you know, I jotted this down in the margins. Like, if you're to a certain extent, right, as a poet and an advocate for poetry, I still have
Mm-hmm.
to say poets for decades or centuries have hurt themselves by, if you're going to talk about sex and you're doing it through metaphors of, you know, birds and bees, just talk about fucking, right?
Yes. Talk about the bee poem. Oh, he's fucking except me. Do that
What
poem.
what a great line. What a great line. No, I'm talking about that's real. That's real.
Yeah.
I'm saying, you know, flowery metaphors, literally and
Gotcha.
figuratively,
Gotcha. Yeah.
or, you know, stylized, very formal, very old-fashioned.
Mm-hmm.
To me is always a spotlight on, look how clever this rhyme scheme is, or look how deftly I'm handling the metaphor. Just talk about what the thing is, and maybe poetry will be more accessible to the so-called average person. You know, I mean, how dare we
Yes.
not try to make this accessible and immediate,
Mm-hmm.
that someone that normally says, I don't understand poetry. I would say to someone that says that, say, open up this book and tell me you don't understand poetry. I think they'll understand it very quickly.
I'm glad. I'm glad. I want my poems to be able to read about by anyone. I mean, I saw some delicate balance of I was thinking of I have a friend who knew CD Wright, and CD Wright was like, wrote on her paper, you gave me deer, but I want venison. So okay, well, I have to find a balance between venison and what I gotta do. That's why when I'm thinking, that's what I'm thinking, okay, how can I make sure I have the venison, which is like specificity, but
Yeah,
also make sure it still sounds like me.
right, right.
Yeah. You gave me deer, but I wanted venison. It's like, whoo. That wasn't for me, but I was like, hey, TCCD, right? She had a good point though. Like, how do
Well,
you get beyond? Okay, I was in a car. What kind of car? Was it a red car, blue car? What did it smell like? Like that kind of stuff. Like, how do you get to the venison but still sound like yourself?
yes. Yes. And you know, I do think that's what separates, I don't even want to say real writers, who cares, but that's what
Yeah.
separates effective writers. Effective writers want to sound like themselves. Effective writers don't
Mm-hmm.
want to imitate and copy. That's one of the reasons I've been on you know, I've been on my soapbox talking about AI. Like, there's a lot we need to be concerned about, a lot we need to be cognizant of, but AI is not going to replace real art because it takes an individual with an individual voice to create meaningful lines. So we need not worry. What we need to worry about is human beings sounding like AI,
Yes.
AI sounding like human beings. Speaking of which, another one that obliged an immediate rereading and is now dog-eared for eternity. One that just absolutely devastated me is No Graveside Flowers. Speaking of flowers.
Oh, that poem, I don't read that often, but I'll read it today. Actually, I wrote that poem at Cave Canem, which is that retreat for people of color. And Patricia Smith was teaching, and she's like, we come in the room, all of us. She's like, hey, everyone, sit down. Think of someone you love. Picture them in your face. You got them yet. She's like, now imagine them in a morgue. Write that poem, go. And so we were all crying. We were all just like, put on some music, eat it.
Right.
It was that visceral, that sort of switch from love to sort of grief.
Yeah.
So yeah, that poem was difficult to write, but I'm glad that it's in the world. If I can find it. What page is that? Yeah, I got it.
You got
57.
it. Okay.
Next, I don't read it often. 57. No graveside flowers. I want to dress you solely in memories. Wrap your body in movie lines. Pull out those sounds of Leroy and the Last Dragon. When I say who's the master, you say show enough. Or your guilty pleasure of watching Bewitched or Charmed, because who wouldn't want to be a witch or wall if wants to wash your skin with the soap you in a suit, pressed and ready for God knows what, but I brought your favorites. A buckle with the silver dragon, and your Tootsie Pop shirt that says, how many licks does it take? Respectful people will lay roses or some other white carnation, pure and clean, but I promise to bring you a sparkling Michael Jackson glove, rolls of Charleston shoes, and Chico sticks. Further back this lament, I am a sparrow with arms flailing out, splayed mouths of loved ones. I'll make it a party and have a DJ spin all your classic hits. I know I haven't dressed your feet yet. Boots, dress shoes, sneakers. I still can't decide, little brother. Can we just sit here till I figure it out? I don't read that one often. I don't read it often, that one.
I knew I would be able to.
I wrote it years ago, 2 years ago, but it gets me every time.
Yeah, and I certainly I didn't want to get too heavy, but I will say that, we talked earlier about every line has to matter. I think we both truly believe that, but there is something about not only poetry in general, but particular poems where when you have a closer and you can bring that closer out, that poem actually kind of made me gasp, and then I immediately read it again. Just unbelievably powerful and beautiful and relatable.
Just thinking writing that poem was just also just thinking about if that ever happened. I have a brother, not gonna win. If that ever happened, it would be me making decisions. Basically, it would be me making decisions. I mean, we're siblings. It would be me because I'm the sort of the responsible one. And so I can see myself. I'm like
the burden
quote,
of the responsible sibling.
Yeah. And so, but I can see myself being paralyzed with indecision.
Sure.
And that's one of my worst fears is being paralyzed with indecision. So I can see myself just sitting there and not making a decision at all.
Sure.
Now it gets me. Yeah. Yeah.
And who couldn't relate to that on some level, or even if not relate, think about it and relate by thinking about it. And again, I think the power of literature to make someone stop and contemplate things that we often maybe don't feel comfortable sitting with, and at times we have to.
Yeah, let's just sit here until we figure it out.
Yeah.
Like, and then I'm thinking to myself, well, he's gone, and I'm sitting here with his body, and I'm just sitting here. That was a rough class. That was a rough class, Sean.
Yeah, but
I
that was
mean,
a
and mind you, we all wrote fantastic poems, but ooh.
right. That's a hell of a prompt. Full props for that prompt. Wow.
Yeah, yeah,
All right,
yeah.
so let's get into, because we've got to cover Cynthia Manic, capital C and M. On your website, um, you you identify as a poet, a storyteller, and a curator. I get it. I think anyone that knows your writing will get it. But if you care to talk us through what you mean, how is Cynthia Manic identify as a poet, a storyteller, and a curator? And what are the differences and similarities, et cetera?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think I'm a poet because I love the way words sound and the way words can change any mind at any time. I'm a storyteller because I don't like poems that leave me wanting. I want to read a poem that will tell me how you felt when you wrote it. How should I feel now? What you were looking at, what you were smelling. I want to have a plate. Your poem should be a plate of food. So as a storyteller, I try to offer plates of food. A curator, I used to have a reading series. I had it for 10 years, so it's a review. I ended it actually just last year. So the curating that was 4 times a year, and that was actually on poems promoting storytelling. So I would have like Nelly Diaz, and I would have emerging artists, but also established artists, and they will all read poems that inspire storytelling. Yeah. Was it a
So
short answer? Sorry, those short answers.
no,
That
no,
was a
no, no,
very
no,
short,
no.
succinct
That's
answer.
that's that's perfect.
Okay.
Naturally, for a 1455 conversation, we talk a
Mhm.
lot here about what does it mean, what does community mean? Why is it important? What does it mean to be a literary citizen? And I think it's safe to say you very much are that.
Mhm.
There's so much there. I think a lot of contemporary writers that either feel very isolated or angry or rejected. The first question I would always ask anyone is, are you part of a community? Are you supporting others? You might be surprised how good it makes you feel to not talk about yourself. Um, you obviously have experience as a curator and a community builder. I would just love you to reflect a little bit on why it's important to you, and words of advice for anyone, creative or not, that
Mhm.
wants to be part of an artistic or literary or creative community, and what the benefits of that are.
I always call it the community pot of poetry. That's what I call it. So if you're gonna put in the pot your book, your poem, your performance at a bookstore, your performance at an open mic, if you're gonna put in the pot all these things that you do for the benefit of poetry, then you should also respond in kind. Read other books of poetry by other poets. Go to the pot. Go to other readings that they invite you to. Go to the pot. You have to put in what you take out. And that's what my personal
Yeah.
philosophy is.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna have 5 readings, and you're gonna be the lead in all those readings, then you should be going to 5 other readings at sometime either the next couple months or like a year. People that come to see you, you should go see them. You have to pay it forward because not everyone's gonna have a room full of people waiting for you to read.
Right.
You have to build up to that. So do the community part of poetry and give back your time. And the time could be online, the time could be a Zoom meeting, the time could be hey, talking on Facebook. Hey, I read your book, I loved it. That could be the time. You really have to sort of make sure that the people you're reading know that they're being read. They're being read in the library. They're being read on a train. They're being read in a bookstore. They're being read on a bus.
Yep.
Put that in the community pot of poetry so they know they're appreciated and they can give back full circle. And also, if you're going to write poems, you're going to be any literary artist, you're going to write yourself. You're going to write by yourself in some lonely room, 1 o'clock in the morning, like I always do.
Right.
After I avoided writing all day, and then 1 a.m., I was like, oh, let me get started. And then I get started. You're going to have to have, it's going to have to go somewhere eventually, right? And so, yeah, that's community. That's either a community of friends. I have people at email 1 o'clock in the morning, hey, I have a weird poem. Do you mind reading it? That's either a community of literary organizations that you admire. You go to their readings, you go to their series, take their classes. That could be a reading group that you join yourself, or you just read books that's not related to poetry. But you sort of have to make yourself involved. You can't be an outsider. You can't be a watcher. I mean, as writers, we watch all the time because we're watching and we're archiving and recording. But at some point, you have to start with the living part, right? You have to get into the community. So it's important for community building, not only for yourself, your confidence, for your eventually your audience, but also for connection to other people. And go to residencies if you can. Take workshop. Meet people who like you or just starting, so you both see your journey progress together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Now my
sharing.
soapbox went on. My soapbox went on.
No,
My
I mean,
soapbox.
here. I completely agree. I think we're just, I think we're in a really curious place, as a culture right now, where obviously social media,
Mhm.
just technology on balance. I mean, I try to lean into the positives. Like, it's an opportunity for connection. It's an opportunity for engagement. There's all these
Yeah.
ways to read, write, share,
Mhm.
but it verges on becoming very competitive and very insular.
And
And then in
overwhelming.
the smaller creative communities, we've got this kind of the scarcity fallacy where, but if I shine light on other people, there's only a little bit of the pie. And it's like, why don't we look at it a completely different way and say, first of all, that is
This pot is
actually,
huge. It's like one of
uh,
those pots from Shakespeare, just tall from trouble. Those those kind of cauldrons. It's a huge pot. There's room for everybody in this pot.
and celebrate that, make the pot bigger, get another pot,
Yeah. Get
make
multiple
sure that
pots.
make the stove full of pots. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
if the pie seems small, it's your job to help make it bigger. And I always
Mhm.
say to my colleagues, like, if not us, who? If we can't lift each other up within the community,
Exactly.
how dare we complain about book sales or marketing or all this other stuff?
Hmm. I mean,
Um,
I definitely created my reading series in 2003 because at the time I could not see anyone on stage who didn't have an MFA. That's all I saw on stages, or that I didn't see anyone who were established and emerging in the same stage together. I was like, it's gotta be a way that people can experience both ends of the spectrum, someone who's been published books and someone who's just starting out. And that's how social review began.
yeah, yeah.
2003. I was like, I'm just gonna do it myself. That is it myself. Yeah.
Yeah, well, exactly. And when we look back on kind of literary history in all communities, so much of these initiatives were self-started,
Hmm.
or built out of a community, a small or large community, and then they became, more inevitable, and kind of sanctioned. But
Yeah.
so much of this energy grows
And they
out
don't
of.
gotta be big. I mean, you can start small. You could have a salon in your apartment, 5 people. That's it. A
That's right.
salon in your apartment, 5 people. That could be it. That could be your way of building a community pot.
Yeah, and it's old school, right? The old
Old
school
school.
ones that weren't necessarily large gatherings.
No, old school. Get some chips, some Joe wine, and there you go. And there
Right.
you go. There you
That's
go.
right.
Yeah.
Um, but that also leads to, though, the inevitable notion of, we do have to try to put ourselves out in the world, put our best foot forward. I would say, a casual visitor to your website, which I
Hmm.
want to, will tell immediately, very professional and polished layout. But you have your hands in a lot of pies, a lot of
Hmm.
pots. Um, let's unpack a little bit what it takes to build a brand as a poet, and what comes first, the writing or the brand. Or in 2024, is it like it's everything?
That's a question I'm actually struggling with right now because I do have a day job that's not anything related to poetry.
Yeah.
So I'm always thinking on my LinkedIn. Should my LinkedIn have my work stuff or should I have my poetry stuff? So now it has both. So I was trying to separate them and it was becoming nuts. So I think to build your brand as a poet, number one, know who you are, know your voice. Okay, if you're not going to be a cheery person, then don't have a pink layout on your website. I mean, like seriously, if you're not gonna have, if you're not automatically cheery person in the morning, don't have your website be a bright lime or bright green. Try to have it reflect your mood.
Yeah.
Also have your bio. It can be short or small, but have it there because you are a writer. You may not feel comfortable saying it, but you're a writer. You're a writer. Establish that in your bio. This is what you're working on.
Yeah.
And also thinking about, we do multiple things in our lives. How are those things reflected in my writing? So if you're writing about X, put X on your website.
Right.
Or you can have a things I love part of your website. I mean, you really can make it personal or as professional as you like it. But basically, you want people to get to know the writer you, so they want to know the real you.
Yep. It's funny that we've come, through this conversation to get back to a very kind of elemental reality, which is your poetry, and you obviously as a person are very
Mm-hmm.
concerned with realness. It's demonstrative in this book, but the fact that you just highlighted that, maybe that's also a part of what gives your poems kind of their urgency and accessibility. This insistence on being real and unvarnished observations about real things.
Yes, I mean, I love the idea of tackling things that are real, but I like wonder too. Like I like the idea of wondering about things, about wondering what the stars are doing when I'm not seeing them. So definitely put that in anyone's work, anyone's website. If you have a wondering about the stars, put that in there.
Yeah.
Put those things that things that interest you, things that pulls you. That can be in your website as well. That can be part of your brand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And in fact, right, it's one of those, like, it shouldn't be a big mystery or shouldn't be a big epiphany. If you lead with authenticity, you'll find authentic connections with others. You'll find your readers, or your readers will find
Yes.
you, because I think
Hmm.
readers do respond to that honesty.
Yes, that with imagination, yeah, that will keep a reader interested for this book and the next, I think.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. Yeah.
Um, I gotta pull one more card. If if you would be so kind, and as we get close to our end here, um, I where is it? Hold on. List poem for things I try to love.
Ooh, this I don't read that poem often either. You pick
I
the
just
weird
wrote.
ones.
I wrote in the margin in large capital letters WOW. That was my editorial comment on that poem.
Okay.
And while you're
This
looking for it, I'll
poems
just
of
remind everyone.
things.
Yeah. That is, folks. Those are real dog ears. That is
Real
a
dog
sign of a
ears.
red book.
Okay. List poems. List poems of things I try to love. Okra with its slime. Cooked eggs that are neither completely solid or liquid, aka poached. Candy corn. Basically all foods in different shades of yellow. Poems about cats named King, Felix, or Abraham. Scrabble. Now put the letter Q. Scrabble and the hot letter Q in my sock. Songs ended abruptly by talking DJs. The uniboob and supporter bras that don't support attractiveness. My oily skin that sometimes feels like a slip and slide. My mother when she calls her unmarried daughter on a Friday night. Absent father to resemble stars with working cell phones. My uterus when it feels like a horde of gladiators in a closed ring. Skin tags shaped like tiny almonds. Realization that even the softest men have edges. My size 11 feet when they feel like mini steamboats. People who video call as a surprise. When my words forge a bonfire. Poetry when pain is its default setting. When strangers assume I have multiple children. When non-strangers ask when I'm having multiple children. My body rolls pre-Spanx. My body rolls when trying to remove sweaty Spanx. My lover when he's mansplaining yeast infections because he knows how to Google. Uno when a bitch to my left puts down draw four. myself when I'm tired, myself every day. Video calls a surprise, my pet peeve. Don't video call me a surprise.
I'll video call my wife sometimes by mistake, and she's like, "Really?" And I'm like,
Like, what are you doing?
I just hang up immediately. Like, my bad. I'll call you back. Yeah, that's a no-no.
That poem was so fun to write. I remember how fun it was writing it now that I'm looking at it again. When you get a cue in Scrabble, you're like, oh no, I'm gonna do it this cue. I'm gonna do it this cue. What am I gonna do with it?
I like the sock technique. I've never thought of that before.
Look, they ain't watching. They ain't watching.
That's right. That's right. Well, I'm glad we saved that one for last, in part because, it encapsulates not the whole, because you contain multitudes, but that gives everyone that's listening right now a flavor for the type of work you're doing, the realness, the authenticity. I just want to reiterate not only my joy for having read this collection, but my real gratitude that you wrote these poems, that you're a writer that engages with our world, because my world is definitely bigger, more crazy, has a little bit more splattered grease on the edges. Thanks to reading these poems, I was able to really get in there. And what a gift you've given to the readers.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
I say this often. I always mean it, but sometimes I really mean it more. I look at the 1455 family not unlike the mafia, in that once you've stepped in, it's very difficult
That's
to come
it.
out.
That's it.
So my hope and demand is that we hear you read poetry again anytime. I want to be in touch. We want to see what you're up to next. Everybody check out. As always, I will put this recording of this conversation on our website and our social. I'll make sure that there are ample links so you can discover Cynthia online, where she lives, at her website, via where her books are available. I'll put a link into Potter's House so you can support them and other independent bookstores. But mostly tonight, I just want to say, No Sweet Without Brine. What a beautiful, amazing collection, and an amazing, beautiful poet. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing this with us. And I hope to be continued. I'd love to talk to you again sometime.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you so much. This was awesome. Really
Yay.
was.
All right. Well, I will see you again on the other side. For now,
Yes.
thank you. Be well. Keep writing. Keep us posted. Everybody out there, thanks for checking us out. Be well. Keep writing and keep us posted. We'll see everybody soon. Everybody take care. And thanks for
Bye,
joining.
guys.
Night.
Night. Bye, Sean.
Bye, Cynthia.